Here's another Sasquatch story. It's called the BossBurg Incident. Let's do this. I like to share stories or information that you might not be familiar with. You may have heard of the Patterson film or the numerous stories about Bigfoot encounters, but here's one that you may not be familiar with. It's called the Bossburg Tracks, or as it's also known as the crippled foot. The story is very interesting because of the players involved. Many of the best known Bigfoot researchers got involved in this incident. Those names include Ivan Marks. He was an acclaimed animal tracker, woodsman, adventurer, and he's also an avid Bigfoot researcher. Marks narrated, co-produced, and appeared as himself in the movie The Legend of Bigfoot. He was also a resident of Bossburg. John Green was also a Bigfoot researcher and a journalist. He is best known for his books that he wrote on the subject of Bigfoot. Rene DeHenden was also a famous Bigfoot researcher that spent most of his life looking for Bigfoot. One of his famous quotes is, I spent over 40 years and I didn't find it. I guess that's got to say something." He is also known for books written on Sasquatch. So let's get into the story. Bossburg is a small ghost town located close to the Canadian border in Stevens County, Washington. The town was once a mining town in the 1800s when silver was discovered. Once all the silver was gone, a lumber mill opened in the 1900s, but little has remained after that. It all started in the year 1969 with reports of several sightings of Bigfoot in the eastern Washington area. In one of the sightings, a woman had gone to the local sheriff's department to report a sighting of two creatures she had seen on the highway. This was the main road from British Columbia, Canada to Spokane. The sheriffs checked the area and didn't see anything, but like most people who report Bigfoot sightings, this woman was ridiculed. An interesting note: during the check of the area, an officer from the Border Patrol was also present. He noticed that it started to get dark outside and that the sheriff deputies started to get nervous and left abruptly. Maybe they had seen something and were scared to be there after dark. Who knows? On November 24th, 1969, Joe Rhodes, a resident butcher from Colville, Washington, found large human-like tracks with a crippled-looking right foot. This was near the Bossburg town dump. The tracks were believed to be of an injured Bigfoot. The locals called the Bigfoot the Bossburg Cripple. After the news broke of the footprints, the town received a lot of visitors to look at the tracks, and Ivan Marks, a Bossburg resident, started looking for additional tracks. Tom Green had heard of the incident and convinced Rene DeHenden, a Bigfoot researcher, to travel to Bossburg from Canada. On November 27th, Rene DeHenden arrived to investigate, but by then, the tracks had mostly been trampled by the visitors. Rene found one track that was covered by a cardboard box. He took a photograph and cast of the right foot, also known as the crippled foot. Over the next several days, Rene talked to town folk, gathered all their stories, and also went into the bush to see if he could find anything. He was joined by another researcher, Bob Titmus. Bob and another researcher, Norm Davis, thought it might be a good idea to hang some meat and fruit from trees to lure out the Bigfoot. They stayed overnight in a vehicle to watch for something to eat the food. 3 days later, well, that something never came, and Bob, frustrated, gave up and went home. They have been looking for tracks and Bigfoot for about 2 weeks to no avail. Then on the morning of December 13th, they found what they were looking for. Renee, Ivan Marks, and a local man named Jim Hawkins hopped into a car and went looking along the banks of Lake Roosevelt. And just before getting to the lake, they noticed a Jeep parked along the road. More on this later. The group got out of their car and started walking, and Ivan ran back shouting, "Bigfoot tracks!" Now that he didn't have any cameras or equipment, so they had to go back to Ivan's home and grab it. Along the way, they saw the occupants of the Jeep. Renee thought they might have hoaxed the tracks, so they decided to ask them if they saw the tracks, and they said they did, and then they got the hell out of there. They got back to the scene of the tracks and measured them. The left foot was 17.5 inches and the right one was 16.5. The right foot was badly deformed. It looked like the third toe was twisted or something. They followed the tracks across a road over a 43-inch fence that was crossed back and forth several times. They followed the tracks up a hill into the forest and saw an imprint of where an animal had laid down. The tracks then went back down the hill and through a rail yard and eventually to the river. The river crossing at this point would be impossible as there was a 150-foot drop, so the tracks continued upstream for 200 feet to where it looks like the creature crossed the river. Renee had remembered looking in the area the day before and there was no tracks, so these were all new. Renee walked the whole path of the tracks 7 times, examining every single one of them. He noticed the right was compressed more than the left in the snow, suggesting that the weight was more on the right foot. They eventually counted all the tracks and found 1,089 tracks. After taking photos and other evidence, they went back to town. Everyone wanted to continue to search for other evidence, but Renee had seen enough. As news stories were published in the following days, tourists started coming from all around. They viewed the tracks and trampled all over most of them. Then 5 days later, after finding the initial tracks, a Border Patrol agent found additional ones on the other side of the river. It looked like where the creature came out. This area was closed to everyone except loggers, and unfortunately, you couldn't see much of anything because the rain had washed most of the tracks away. The hunt for Bigfoot continued into December and January. Search parties and hunters scoured the mountains with 4-wheel drives, planes, and snowmobiles to see if they could kill a Bigfoot. After all the searching, they found nothing. Years later, a former Smithsonian primatologist, Dr. John Napier, he examined the casts and photographs of the Bossburg footprints. He identified the right foot deformity as club foot because of the way the heels were defined in the footprints. He concluded that the cause was probably an early childhood injury. He went on to say, "It's very difficult to conceive of a hoaxer so subtle, so knowledgeable, and so sick, who would deliberately fake a footprint of this nature. I suppose it is possible, but it's also so unlikely that I'm prepared to discount it." Although they didn't find the Bigfoot, people continued to search for it. If you go online and look up Cripplefoot, you can see a lot of stories and also see all the pictures and all of the players that are involved in the story. One of the other things that I didn't include in this video was a hoax that was perpetrated by Ivan Marks in the year 1972. I'll do a whole new video on that piece of it because that part of the story is as long as this one is. Hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll talk to you soon.